Interview 7, Patrick Murck, Bitcoin Foundation /data. This is Day 2 Coin Summit. Patrick, thanks for joining us on Let's Talk Bitcoin today.
Yeah, thanks, Adam.
So yesterday during the panel, when I travel, I don't look at the internet or do anything. I'm a total Luddite. Yeah. So I didn't know about the IRS guidance that came out, but it actually is sort of weird and sort of contradictory, and I wanted to get your thoughts on it. Can you kind of give us a summary of what they've said?
Yeah, so essentially you're going to treat Bitcoin as property, as an asset, which in some contexts makes a lot of sense. So if you're a speculator and you're an investor, you buy Bitcoin, you buy it at one price, you sell it at another, you book a capital loss, capital gain. That all makes perfect sense. That's what you would expect. What's interesting and potentially problematic is that you're applying that same framework even when people are using Bitcoin as a currency for transacting, so merchant transactions. So if I acquire a Bitcoin for providing services to somebody and I spend a bit cent on a cup of coffee, even if that transaction occurred within, say, half an hour of each other, now I'm having to book and realize either a gain or loss on that transaction. And that's just, it's untenable, the way that's going to actually play out, in the real world. So we need to go back and rethink some of how they did this.
So this is IRS guidance that came out, 2-3 weeks before the taxable, before we actually have to turn in our income tax. I mean, you made a comment about how everybody gets to extend. Certainly we're in this situation, I guess. We thought we had our taxes pretty well taken care of because we were, following the FinCEN guidance that basically said that any money we take out of Bitcoin and into dollars, that's something we have to deal with from a taxable standpoint. But that's aggressively different than this new guidance. So, do we need to go back through and redo all of our taxes?
In fact, you might have to go back and redo all your taxes and rethink all your taxes. Obviously the timing was interesting, to say the least. But you point at a deeper kind of conflict within the two treatments. So there's the obvious kind of at the surface layer. Well, FinCEN calls it money and the IRS calls it property, which may or may not really be a big conflict. Maybe you're just talking about an asset as a substitute for money on the fence. That's how you can make that argument. But the really deeper conflict that's happening within one agency, which is slightly disappointing, is that in the FinCEN guidance, there was encouragement to use Bitcoin as a currency, to use it to pay for things, for goods and services. And in the IRS guidance, essentially they're doing the opposite. They're discouraging its use as a currency and for paying for goods and services, and encouraging investment and speculation in the Bitcoin as an asset.
So the guidance from the first time actually is completely contrary to the guidance that's been given now. And since this new IRS guidance is retroactive indefinitely, I guess, there didn't seem like there was a time frame associated with it, so I'm assuming that old transactions aren't grandfathered in.
Well, correct, because guidance isn't rulemaking. So they're saying we didn't create new rules here. Yeah, right. We didn't create new rules here, but we're just interpreting our old rules, as a public service.
So, you should have figured this out. It was all there in the rules. We're just clarifying because obviously you didn't get it.
Yeah, sure. No, they did put a provision, a little sentence in there that says, listen, if you can reasonably show that, you didn't understand it or you don't have the records anymore or something, then, we'll consider forgiveness in those cases.
So you're saying that my lack of organization is actually potentially a saving grace in this situation?
We won't get into incentive structures in the real world, so.
Fair enough. So one of the other organizations that you're involved in, besides the Bitcoin Foundation, is a relatively new group called Data. And again, you're involved as a board member?
That's correct. I'm on the board of directors.
So, we had a conversation yesterday with Eden Yago about, what Data is trying to do. And so, again, from your perspective, how does this fit in compared to the Bitcoin Foundation, relative to the Bitcoin Foundation? Where are the overlaps? Where is Data doing something fundamentally different?
Yeah, so when you think about the Bitcoin Foundation, you have a member-driven organization. It's meant to be kind of a community resource. We're still obviously working through some growing pains to get to this point, but that's the goal. And the Bitcoin Foundation is supposed to represent members in support of the Bitcoin protocol, keeping the Bitcoin protocol open, extensible, participatory, so that anybody can use it freely, right? While we're doing that, there are certain problems. How do you grow the ecosystem, particularly at the exchange level, which has been now considered a critical control point in the intersection between the digital economy and the traditional financial economy? So how do you manage that? So we can make some movement on that, and we have been working on those issues. But at its heart, the foundation is focused on the protocol. We talk about protocol neutrality, user-defined privacy, things that really support kind of how you can use the protocol as an individual. The exchanges it's natural that it's going to evolve, that the exchanges are going to want to have their own kind of voice. And they should, because they have very, very different issues that they have to deal with, in particular around anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing, data security, privacy issues. They're going to have distinct issues. And frankly, it's a resource drain on the foundation to support that all the time.
And so this is where data comes in?
And to wrap that up, that's where data should come in, right? And the first thing that you can do to help move the needle on those issues right now is to create best practices, security guidelines, standards for operating a Bitcoin exchange, a digital currency exchange in general.
So one of the things that I've been kind of waiting and expecting, and now I think it's starting to happen, is there are two things. One is on the transparency side. Again, this is all so much more relevant in the aftermath of the Gox incident. So on the one hand, you have transparency where if there are issues, there are ways, if Mt. Gox had been a transparent institution, we would have been able to see that these were issues way before it got to the point where now it's this horrible thing and it's going to take years or months to unwrap it, just because it all happened privately, it's non-transparently. So that's one side of it. I'm curious about, what you think for exchanges if we have now passed a tipping point there. And then the other side of it is around insurance and the idea that exchanges in the conventional world are insured. There just hasn't been the willingness or the ability to do it yet. But when insurance comes in, aren't standards that, make it so that insurance can be affordable for good players versus bad players? Isn't that kind of an inevitability?
Yeah, so as people gain insurance, the insurance companies will put pressure to increase standards and best practices and all that. It's a nice, healthy, virtuous cycle there. As far as the transparency, I agree. Absolutely, 100%. And I think, we're seeing this interesting shift from, I have a friend, Ryan Strauss, and he after the Gox thing, he said, the whole point of Bitcoin wasn't to replace trusted third parties with trustless third parties, right? So you got to create trust in different ways. And we have this opportunity right now to create different types of exchanges, non-custodial accounts, multi-sig accounts, things like that, decentralized exchanges, where you're not always relying on trust to facilitate the transaction. There will probably always be exchanges that work that way, and that's fine. They're going to face the highest requirements, the highest burdens on the regulatory side and the consumer protection field. They're the ones that are going to need to go get the insurance, and they're the ones who are going to be held to standards by their insurance companies. In the interim, I think there's an opportunity to set minimum standards, set best practices, lay them out, let people understand how to build a safe exchange, and as a consumer, what a safe exchange looks like.
So same question applied to the data organization and the Bitcoin Foundation organization. These are organizations that so far aren't really very transparent, and yet they are going to be holding funds of members. So is there any intention, expectation, either on your part or institutionally, that transparency should be something that's, for things beyond exchanges?
Yeah, no, I absolutely think that would be a good thing, right? I can't speak for data yet because it's very fledgling. On the foundation, we file our Form 990 and we publish it. We publish it fast. Other nonprofits, they usually wait it out until the IRS publishes it. When we did our first one, we published it very quickly. We intend to do the exact same thing this year. So that's one level of transparency. I think that there are other opportunities to create even further transparency, and we talked about this early. How do we do that? How do we create transparency using the blockchain without revealing people's private information? And it's a difficult problem to solve. I know people are working on it, but I think if there's a good solution, I'm sure we would embrace it.
So there have been some questions about, since Mt. Gox was a pivotal part of the foundation for a long period of time, whether or not any foundation funds were stored at Mt. Gox. And there hasn't been a statement on this yet. Again, if you don't want to answer, you don't have to, but it's a question I think people would like to know the answer to.
Sure thing. So when it comes to Mt. Gox, I simply can't comment because there's an ongoing criminal investigation. We're certainly not a target or anything like that, but we are talking to law enforcement about certain things that may or may not have happened. No one should have any concerns about the general financial welfare of the Bitcoin Foundation in general. Okay.
So, final thoughts. What is next for the foundation or for data? What are the exciting things on your horizon that you think that people should really be paying attention to?
Yeah, so we have a number of really interesting projects coming up. So for data, we have the annual meeting coming up. I think there's a big opportunity for the community to get involved in shaping sort of what the best practices should look like. And not just from, the point of view of a lawyer writing down rules. That's not fun for anybody, even the lawyers, I promise. But there can be some technical advancement there as well. So I know like Greg Maxwell is working on some interesting things about provably solvent exchanges and things like that. Like that's a really interesting way of attacking standards and best practices. So that's interesting on the data side. On the Bitcoin Foundation side, we have a lot of kind of things in the hopper. We're working on solving some of in the U.S. some of these state regulatory issues by creating a kind of model rule that some of the state regulators and the task force can look at and draw from. We hopefully soon will open source that so that people can kind of add their comments in. I would love to put it on GitHub if I can, right alongside our bylaws. I would love to see more people participate in shaping our bylaws through GitHub. We put them out there for people to make even our bylaws, our governing document, a community project. But we haven't had a lot of action there, just a little bit. But there's been some good dialogue in some of the areas where there's been pull requests there. And then with Jim Harper coming on board as our Global Policy Counsel, which is very exciting to me, he's going to have a study that he's going to release on the threat matrix, the risk factors, how we can respond to those things from regulators, from banks, things like that. And that'll serve as our platform for our public policy goals going forward. And again, opening that up to community involvement.
So when are you planning on paying your taxes? Are you filing for an extension?
I'm filing for an extension.
Fair enough. Patrick Murck, thank you very much for your time.
Yep, thanks, Adam. Appreciate it.
This is Chris Joseph bringing you news on Next, the first true second-generation cryptocurrency for March 29th, 2014. Now that development of Next is becoming more formalized, the community has begun creating Next Improvement Proposals, or NIPs, to suggest extensions, modifications, and improvements for the platform. As you might suspect, these are modeled after the mechanisms used by Python and Bitcoin. Improvement proposals in progress are being discussed on the new forums at nxtforum.org. Proposals being crafted right now are related to two-factor authentication for Next clients, arbitrary asset pairings on the decentralized asset exchange, and a mechanism for allowing transaction fees to be automatically regulated by the network. In other news, Brian Snyder represented Next at Coin Summit in San Francisco, and his presentation can be found on the Coin Summit channel on YouTube. For more general information on Next, head to nextcrypto.org or mynxt.org. And stay tuned for more news on Next on the next Let's Talk Bitcoin broadcast.